Hello again, I'm Chris West. In my recent videos I introduced the idea of springback fingerings, and then I showed how you can use them to play all your major scales with one fingering, and all, or almost all, of your harmonic minor scales with another fingering. So in this video I'm going to talk about melodic minor scales. Okay, so melodic minors. They're the ones that are different on the way up from on the way down. If you had a choice, they're probably the ones you chose not to do. But they really aren't too difficult. On the way up, there's only one note different from your major scales. And on the way down, there's only one note different from your harmonic minors. And for one octave melodic minor scales, we have two good fingerings. Firstly, we have a fingering in pairs which has all the same shifts as a one octave major scale. And you can use that for any of the keys where the major scale started on a 1, which is almost all of them apart from the open strings and A flat. If you've practiced your one octave major scales, this fingering in pairs is going to come very naturally to you. But we're mainly going to use this fingering on the top two strings. If we start on the A or E string, we have a springback fingering, which is more like the fingering we used for harmonic minors. You shift after the first note, and then use a springback fingering for the last 5 notes on the way up. And when you come down, the springback is in exactly the same place as it came in the harmonic minor. Every time you shift, it's only by a semitone. And that fingering will work for any key starting on the bottom two strings from first position up. If you want to play E or F like this, you can shift up after 3 notes, instead of going up a string. But for other keys, if you want to use only 2 strings, the shifts are smoother using the pairs fingering. So we have 2 different fingerings depending on where we are starting the scale. But if we weren't playing a whole octave, the preference would not be as clear-cut. If you aren't playing exactly 1 octave, it might be better to shift after the first note if you have an odd number of notes, but play in pairs if you have an even number. So starting on B, that's 2 notes, 3 notes is odd, 4 notes is even, 5 notes, 6 notes, 7 notes, and so on. So you should practice both fingerings whenever you can, because either of them might be useful in different situations. You can get some very cool fingerings by adding 2 one octave springback fingerings together to play E and F melodic minor. I particularly like how coming down F minor with 2 springbacks uses exactly the same fingering as we learnt for its relative major, A flat. But as we saw when I covered harmonic minor scales, if you keep trying to do that higher and higher, it eventually becomes too high to do the springbacks. And it gets confusing because that happens in different places when you're ascending from when you're descending. It all gets very complicated, deciding which keys you can use them in. So instead of having to worry about that, I'm going to recommend that for all 2 octave melodic minor scales from F sharp up, you shift up after the first note and then play everything after that in pairs, up and down. You could split that into chunks by thinking of the 7-block passage that we just learnt and then putting a paired fingering on top. Or you could think of it another way by thinking of it as the springback fingering concertinaed out with a whole load of 4s and 1s in between the original fingering. And by the way, you might want to have a think about why a fingering like this doesn't work as well for major scales or harmonic minors. If you've watched my video on harmonic minor scales, you might remember that when we got high enough, we could use diatonic hand shape to replicate the springback fingerings we used in lower octaves. And that's true again now. I could add on a 3rd octave of any key by using a diatonic hand shape going up and down. But this is a very fussy fingering, especially that change of shape you have to do as you go around the top. So it's much better to play that top octave in pairs. Playing this is much more reliable and fluent than playing this. So if you want to play a 3-octave scale, you should put the extra octave underneath our usual 2-octave fingering, not on top of it. You play a 1-octave fingering ending on a 4, and then play all those pairs. And as I said before, the best 1-octave fingering, starting on the bottom 2 strings, is the springback fingering. So once again, we have one fingering that works for all keys. If you've watched all 3 of my scales videos, hopefully I've given you a small enough number of different patterns that you can learn them all and reproduce whichever one you need at the drop of a hat. You can stop worrying about playing scales and start enjoying the music. And the next stage is for you to learn to recognise straight away when these scales crop up in the music you're working on. So that's all for today. Bye for now.